Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows is the 4th booster set in Cardfight Vanguard, but was actually released as the 6th set in the English format of the game. As mentioned countless times before, the English format followed a different release schedule. In the next video, we'll finally explore the rumored reasons behind this as we cover Set 5, Awakening of Twin Blades. But first, we need to finish where we left off last video, wrapping up the first full year of the game's history in 2012 and the conclusion of the first ever World Championship series for the game. Thanks for sticking with me for so long. Let's finish this year with a bang. Last time we went over the first 12 qualifiers of the World Championships, which was overall dominated by Gold Paladin. Of those 12 qualifiers, Gold Paladin took 63% of the first and second tops. These tops were split between the Spectral Duke variant and the Ezel Garmor variant, with the Spectral Duke variant being the most popular. After Gold Paladin, the deck with the second most tops was Narukami. It was usually some variant of Vermilion and only had 3 tops, a measly 13%. The last qualifier we went over was on October 6, 2012. Since the remaining qualifiers take place before December 14th, the release of Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows, let's go through the remaining qualifiers before we discuss today's featured booster set. Please note that only the following products will be legal for these events, even for the events that take place in Japan. I mentioned last time that we had 3 events on October 6th, 2012, but there was actually 4. The 4th qualifier was in Osaka, Japan. There were a total of 3 qualifiers in Japan actually, but these events were held under the English format, which means they were limited to the boosters I mentioned a few moments ago. At the time, Japan was already playing with the latest set, BT08, and had access to BT05, which was skipped in English. The Japanese qualifiers were on October 6th in Osaka, October 13th in Tokyo, and October 20th in Nagoya. Japanese players, of course, knew the cards in this format the best, having had the most time to use and playtest with them. This may be why Kobayashi Hironao won the Osaka qualifier with Ezel Garmor, but was the only first place Gold Paladin at these qualifiers. The runner-up was Harukoichi, highlighting a Narukami deck. Tokyo was won by Akizawa Toyaka's Overlord, and Shinohara Yoshitaka's Soulless Witches in second. The final Japanese qualifier in Nagoya was won by Hiroshi Kozaki with Tsukiyumi and Spectral Duke Dragon as the runner-up, piloted by Jun Tenjima. Honestly, I expected Tsukiyumi to top more in these Japanese events. Since Japan had been playing in the Big 3 format for so long, and with Tsukiyumi being one of those Big 3, I expected her to be the go-to deck for these events. However, she only managed to get 1 top in the Japanese qualifiers. Both Gold Paladin lists were rather standard to what we've discussed so far, except both players included cards from Set 7, Rampage of the Beast King, in their lists. We'll start to see these cards become incorporated in the Golds list we'll see in the rest of the qualifiers. The Narukami build actually had about 50% of its cards from the trial deck 6, Resonance of Thunder Dragon, while the Overlord list, well, that pretty much used only cards from the first ever booster released a year prior in English, Descent of the King of Knights. The Tsukiyumi list was standard to the ones we've discussed before as well, as it was likely perfected in Japan and copied overseas. The Soulless Witches deck is an Oracle Think Tank deck we discussed prior that was made possible due to its support from Set 7. This deck was the opposite of Tsukiyumi, emptying out its soul instead of keeping it at 6 or more cards. Both these decks had Silent Tom as their game ender. After the Japanese qualifiers, we have our next 3 qualifiers on October 13th, 20th, and 27th in Atlanta, USA, United Kingdom, and Singapore respectively. All 3 of these qualifiers were won by Gold Paladin, with each variant getting a top here. In Atlanta, we start to see a new variant of the deck, with players using the White Hair Pelennor from set 7. This variant replaces Ezel with Pelennor and retains the use of Garmor. Garmor continued to be a very strong center line as a Vanguard, making it a good Vanguard to ride. However, you could also call Pelennor mid-battle to get an extra Vanguard attack through Vivian, the Lop-Eared Shooter, or the Spring Breeze Messenger, which both players played. The UK qualifier was won by Anthony Francis's Ezel Garmor list, which only had a single Dindrain from set 7 to differentiate itself from the typical list. In Singapore, Haruyanto Tan won with Spectral Duke, playing 2 copies of the Lop-Eared Shooter from set 7. In the same event, we had the runner-up Woon Chong Moon with Tsukiyumi. This Tsukiyumi list was similar to the Japanese one, but with Luckbird for more draw power. But back over in the UK, the runner-up was actually Daniel Conham with a Lukier deck. As we discussed last time, Lukier focused on amassing and calling out specific cards from Seoul, either through her Limit Break or through the powerful Purple Trapezist. Daniel also used the Crimson Beast Tamer engine from set 3, which allowed you to have 11k attackers and 9k boosters if you had a copy of this card in your Soul. This list, however, does not contain any of the attack extenders from set 3, and instead focused on setting up strong offensive lines with the Crimson Beast Tamer engine and Lukier's effect to gain power whenever a card was called out from Soul. We actually get a chance to see another list for Lukier in the last 3 qualifiers. The first of these was on October 27 in Taiwan, where we actually had 0 Gold Paladin players in the top 2. Instead, we had Tsukiyumi in both first and second. Yi Jian Yang won the event with Lin Ming Lian as the runner-up. Both players played very similar lists, and both even played the Dragon Month Gojo from Kagero in their list for more draw power, and 0 copies of any perfect card. The next day, we had the Hong Kong qualifier, which also had 0 Gold Paladins in the top 2. We instead had another top for Spike Brothers, thanks to Mukki Chong, who won this qualifier, and Cham Chon Lok as the runner-up with Lukier again. Sham's Lukier list makes much more liberal use of Counterblast compared to the previous list, with cards like The Girl Who Crossed the Gap, Nightmare Doll Alice, and even the Mega Blast unit Dark Illusionist Robert. The final qualifier was a few days later, on November 3rd, 2012, in Los Angeles, California. This event almost continued the streak of no Gold Paladin tops, with Donald Buckley winning the entire event with Grand Blue. However, the runner-up Masashi Terayama ended up topping with Spectral Duke Dragon. Masashi made use of the Namae Lion, the Gold Paladin Special Intercept, and Dindrain in their list. Donald's list is another one of those lists that we discussed in a previous video, as it runs to superiorize in Cocytus and Swordmaster. Both of these grade 3s could be written from drop, with Swordmaster being able to be written if you're on grade 2, while your opponent might still be on grade 1. With that, we've gone through all of the 2012 qualifiers. Top players from all of these qualifiers will now have to compete in a regional qualifier to determine the winners for each region, those regions being North America, Europe, and Asia Oceania. Those winners will compete in the final tournament, the World Championships. The North American qualifier was actually the day right after the Los Angeles tournament we just went over. This meant the winners of that tournament had to come back the very next day to compete yet again. We'll discuss this and more a bit later in the video. But before we move on, let's do a quick recap of all of the topping decks of these qualifiers. Unsurprisingly, Gold Paladin dominated the qualifiers, having undisputably the most tops. Out of the 21 qualifiers, Gold Paladin won first in 12 of them. Even in the 9 qualifiers where they did not win first place, they still managed to get second 4 times. Meaning we only had 5 qualifiers out of 21 without Gold Paladin in the top 2 spots. Among the Gold Paladin variants, Spectral Duke Dragon topped 13 times, followed by Ezel Garmor with 6 tops, and the newly formed Garmor Pelennor with just 2 tops. Oracle Think Tank decks had 6 tops, with 5 of them from Tsukuyomi and only 1 from Koko, or Soulless Witches. Narukami had 4 tops, while Kagero had 3. We had 2 tops each for Lukier, Azure Dragon, and Dudley Emperor. Lastly, 1 of each for Grand Blue and Royal Paladin. We'll see what decks are used in original qualifiers soon, but let's go over today's featured booster set. The 4th booster set, Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows, released on December 14th, 2012. This set was massively popular and highly anticipated by the English format players, thanks to the arrival of the new clan, Shadow Paladin. While the first 2 English Shadow Paladins came out of Cavalry of Black Steel, it wasn't until this release that the clan actually became playable. The cover of the box features Ren, one of the most popular characters in the anime series, surrounded by some of his units. Interestingly, the units chosen for the cover are all very low rarity, consisting of 2 commons and 1 rare. This set was released after the 2012 World Championship Finals, making Set 7, Rampage of the Beast King, the last main booster set legal for that event. This set contained a total of 82 unique cards in the English version, 2 more than the Japanese version. Like prior boosters, previously released Japanese promos were included in the main set list for English. This includes the Cursed Lancer and the Mega Connolly Battler B. Cursed Lancer was originally released as a CD promo for the band Jam Project, who's done songs for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, but also for the Cardfight Vanguard anime as well. Cursed Lancer is a Shadow Paladin card that was very vital to the deck as it allowed you to unflip or countercharge. Thankfully for English players, this card was a lot cheaper and easier to access as it was included as a rare in the set. Whew, it's a good thing that we don't see these kind of essential cards locked behind these types of non-booster set products anymore. Right? Mega Colony Battler B was naturally a Mega Colony card, and it is so far the cheapest, cost-wise, way to activate Mega Colony's gimmick of paralyzing an opponent's unit, being Counterblast 1 instead of the usual Counterblast 2. We'll learn a bit more of these clans' support cards today, as Mega Colony received a total of 17 cards, and Shadow Paladin, who was the main feature of this set, received a total of 23 cards. Along with these 2 clans, 4 other clans also received support in this set for a total of 6. Those other clans were Royal Paladin, receiving only 4 cards, Kagero, and Nova Grappler, who each received 10 cards, and finally Dimension Police, who received a total of 18 cards. While we managed to get Cursed Lancer and Mega Colony Battler B included in the English version, similar to Set 7, we did not get the deck dividers as box toppers that Japan got. These featured artwork of cards from this set. Instead of deck dividers, we received the box topper promo cards in each box, 1 of each of the Dark Dictator from Shadow Paladin and the Epitome of Knowledge Sylvest from Great Nature. The Dark Dictator was a grade 3 that resembles an evil version of the King of Knights Alfred, and was originally released in Japan with the Cardfight Vanguard manga Volume 4. Epitome of Knowledge Sylvest was originally released as a promo card with Trial Deck 7, Descent of the Marine Emperor. It is also the most baffling Cardfight Vanguard card I have ever seen in my entire life. This card is the first ever grade 4 to ever be released in the game's history. It had 2 effects. One effect allowed this card to gain 10k power when you had 3 or more Great Nature cards. This card also had 13k base attack and of course could only be written over a grade 3 and cannot be called to Rearguard Circle unless you had a grade 4 Vanguard, which at this point was only itself. It also had another effect that varied based on if you were playing the English or Japanese version of this card. In English, this card's effect stated, This card cannot be put in a deck after February 28, 2013. In Japanese, the date was instead September 21st, 2012. I've never been more confused reading a card's text than I have been reading this card. Why does it have an expiration date? Why even print an expiration date on a physical trading card? The reason believed by most for this effect and its existence, it was that it was created to boost the strength of Great Nature. Even after receiving so many cards of support in Set 7, Rampage of the Beast King, it was not enough to make the clan relevant. So this card was added as a promo for the clan, to give them a boost. However, there was a fear of it being too strong of a boost. And as a safety measure, Bushiroad experimented with giving this card an expiration date? But like, why an expiration date? Bushiroad owns this card game. They can make up the rules themselves. And they've done restrictions on cards in the past, and have seen in other card games that they ban cards as well, and they themselves will end up banning cards in the future. So why would they even consider printing an expiration date on a card? I will never understand, and we may never know the real reason, but instead of infuriating myself any further, let's look at cards featured in Set 4, Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows. The main key or chase cards for Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows included cards from Shadow Paladin, unsurprisingly. These included the triple rare card Phantom Blaster Dragon, as well as its SP version, an alt art card using the card art from the anime, which might explain its ridiculous modern day price. Another card that was very hard to find was surprisingly the rare card, Blaster Dart. Even though the card was printed as a rare, which is the second lowest rarity, Blaster Dart was apparently short printed at the time, according to players. Short printing is a disgusting TCG practice of intentionally printing fewer copies of a card, regardless of its actual stated rarity. Other Shadow Paladin and Chase cards were the triple rare Grade 2 Skull Witch Nemain, who will become a mainstay in Shadow Paladin decks for a long time. There was also the PG Dark Shield Mac Lear, as many players wanted to build Shadow Paladin at the time. As per usual, copies of these PGs could go from anywhere to $20 to $30. Many players hoped to complete their Blau or Nigman core instead, as they were much cheaper alternatives to building the very popular Shadow Paladins. Another non-Shadow Paladin chase card was the Commander Laurel for Dimension Police. This card is currently seen play and is on the restriction list for the premium format as of the time of writing this, 13 years after its release. This set fleshed out Mega Colony and Dimension Police, as well as properly introducing Shadow Paladin. They received one of each trigger type and perfect guards for each of these clans. Mega Colony and Shadow Paladin also received some cards with effects shared across other clans, while Dimension Police and the rest of the clans received cards that were more directly tied to the main playstyle of the clan. Mega Colony actually received a Mega Blast unit, while Shadow Paladin and Dimension Police wouldn't receive theirs till a little later. We did see 3 new types of effects that would be shared across clans introduced in this set. The first were the grade 3s with 9k power, but could call from the top card of your deck if that unit was of the same clan as itself. The most famous of these being the Dark Mage Badhad Kar of Shadow Paladin, as his effect was very useful for the clan's playstyle. Kar became so well known that some even refer to these types of cards as Kar clones. Player often refer to cards with the same effect as a clone of the card that is the most known for using this effect. Another shared effect introduced in this set were grade 2s with 10k power that would actually lose 5k power if you didn't have a specific type of Vanguard. However, they have the upside of being able to gain 2k when attacking, becoming 12k attackers when the right Vanguard was present. I couldn't find a specific name the community called these cards other than just bad. These cards worked with another shared effect in this set, Type 2 Ride Lines. Set 4 gave us an evolution to the ride chain mechanic. In the English format, ride chains were introduced in Set 6, Breaker of Limits, with the Ergodale ride chain, and continued with locks in Set 7, Rampage of the Beast King. But these were actually the third type of ride chain, which we'll call Type 3. These Type 3 ride chains could look at the top 7 cards to either add a grade 3 or grade 2 from the ride chain to your hand when you specifically rolled the grade 1 of the ride chain over the grade 0. Afterwards, in Set 3, which was released out of order, we received the first ride chain type with Galahad and Tsukiyomi, which we'll call Type 1 ride chains. Set 4 now introduced Type 2 ride chains, which allowed you to search your entire deck for the grade 2 of your ride chain and add it to your hand instead. The grade 1s of the ride chain could also allow you to directly search for the grade 3 of the ride chain from the deck when they were placed on a rearguard circle. However, they had the downside of being 6k base power instead of 7k. Because of these effects, players were able to experiment with the usual grade ratio for their builds. The golden ratio at this time for most of the decks was 14, 11, 8, grade 1s, grade 2s, and grade 3s respectively. This ensured that you would see your grade 1 rides with extras to boost with, as well as your grade 2 and 3 rides, but also just enough of them where you wouldn't constantly clog up your hand with them. But with the grade 0 and grade 1 of the ride chain directly searching out a grade 2 and grade 3 respectively, players finally had some wiggle room to experiment, while not fearing being grade stuck as much. We actually received 5 types of these Type 2 ride chains this set, with the previously mentioned Blaster Dark and Phantom Blaster Dragon being part of the Blaster ride chain in Shadow Paladin, being one of them. The others were the Amber Dragon ride chain for Kagro, the Blau ride chain for Nova Grappler, the Enigman ride chain for Dementia Police, and finally the Giraffe ride chain for Mega Colony. Many of these will be successful for their clans, all except for maybe Giraffe. Let's take a look at some of the decks you can build thanks to this booster expansion. In total, this set actually provided us with 6 brand new decks to build, while not directly supporting any of the existing decks we have so far. These brand new decks will be Dog Garmor for Royal Paladin, Phantom Blaster Dragon for Shadow Paladin, Amber Dragon for Kagro, Enigman for Dimension Police, and finally Giraffe for Mega Colony, who I mentioned did not have a successful time. Let's take a look into why. Giraffe is the Type 2 ride line Mega Colony received, with the main grade 3 being the triple rare Evil Armor General Giraffe, which had the effect to retire 2 of your opponent's rearguards. While this level of removal would be powerful during this time, this effect only worked if your attack hit a Vanguard, and you paid Counterblast 2, and you retired 2 of your own rearguards. On top of that, you could only retire grade 1 or less rearguards. Aside from being overcosted, this effect didn't really line up with the rest of the clan's main gimmick of paralyzing the opponent's units, not allowing them to stand on the following turn. Unfortunately, the most beneficial cards Mega Colony players got from this set was their own PGs and their own triggers. Mega Colony would not see support again in a main booster set until set 15, Infinite Rebirth, in 2014, but would at least get 5 cards in the first extra booster, Cosmic Style Volume 1, which would be released in English later on in 2013. Here's what a Giraffe focus list might have looked like at the time. Unlike the prior ride chain decks, only 3 copies of the grade 2 and grade 3 are being played here, as the Type 2 ride chains had an easy way to search out these cards. Both builds weren't aiming to paralyze the opponent's units constantly, but rather use the consistency provided by the ride chain for solid plays, strong center lines with cards like the Stealth Millipede, who's often a 10k booster, and saving that paralyzing retire for just the right moment. The Giraffe deck actually played very similar to the new Amber Dragon deck, the new Type 2 ride chain for Kagro. Amber Dragon, Eclipse, even had practically the same effect as Giraffe, paying Counterblast 2 to retire 2 of your opponent's rearguards when its attack hit a Vanguard. However, Eclipse did not need to retire its own rearguards to do so, and could retire any rearguards, not just grade 1s. Of course, the downside of this effect was that you needed to pay this cost in main phase before you attack. This means your opponent could just guard your Vanguard's attack, and your attack would not hit, making you pay that counterblast 2 for no reason. Here's an Amber Dragon list. Overall, the strategy for Kagero here has remained the same as it has since its inception, controlling the opponent's advance by taking out their backline boosters and swinging with big Vanguard swings. Kagero is actually in a good position at this point, having the seniority of being one of the first clans ever printed, granting it the option to play different trigger lineups and different grade 3s at this point. Nova Grappler is another clan with some seniority, but with not as many options as Kagero had. Nova Grappler did get a Type 2 Ride Chain this set, and it is one of the most popular archetypes for the clan to this day, Blaus. Blaus are, for lack of a better word, Gundam-looking giant mechs that focus on multiple Vanguard restands. The grade 3 of the Ride Chain, Stern Blau Kluger, was similar to the last two grade 3s we discussed, as it also had a Counterblast 2 effect that activated when its attack hit a Vanguard. However, you also needed to discard 2 Nova Grappler cards from your hand as well. After that, you could restand all units in the center column. Stern would lose the Twin Drive ability till the end of the turn, but it could attack again during that turn. As a reminder, even without Twin Drive, unless stated otherwise by a card effect, a unit on Vanguard Circle can do 1 drive. This effect was not locked to once per turn, if you didn't notice yet. While this effect was Counterblast 2, you could combine Stern with the Toolkit Boy from this set. This grade 1 could unflip 1 card in your damage zone, or countercharge, if its attack boosted hit a Vanguard. Since Stern restood the whole column, Toolkit Boy would unflip a card on every restand. Many Vanguard Zero players might be very familiar with this combo. However, in the TCG, Toolkit Boy was only 5k. So at this time instead, most players used the grade 1 Dancing Wolf behind the Vanguard. Dancing Wolf was a 7k base, grade 1, and it gained 3k power when it restood in the battle phase. Here's what a Blau list looked like at this time. Keep in mind, this list is pre-BT05, where some iconic cards like the Street Bouncer are not present here right now. But we will see Blaus a lot throughout the history of Vanguard in many different variations. Speaking of different variations, Royal Paladin received only 4 cards from this set, all 4 Royal Paladin's version of Garmor. Ironically, we got this version after the Gold Paladin version, considering that was actually the newer one. This version focused on dogs, or more specifically, Snowgull and Brugol from this set. Brugol was a new grade 0 starter for the clan, and was actually used outside of Garmor because it was the only other option for Royal Paladin players. Barkle was still restricted as a starter, so players only had the option of the vanilla Stardust Trumpeter or the Ride Chain for Galahad. For those that did not want to play the Ride Chain, there was finally another viable option. Brugol and Snowgull both gained 1k power for each copy of the same named card on the field, and Garmor gained 1k for each Brugol or Snowgull you owned. Garmor could also call Snowgull or Brugol from the deck to the field. This effect was also shared with the grade 2 version of Garmor. Here's what a deck for Garmor might have looked like. The Royal Paladin version of Garmor will not really be supported as a deck going further. Shadow Paladin was a clan similar to Royal and Gold Paladin, using knights in armor as the main motif. But as the name implies, these knights are often in dark armor and fall more on the sinister sides of things. As we discussed in a previous video, Shadow Paladin was a clan whose game plan centered on retiring its own rearguards, similar to Tachikaze and Great Nature. We can see this in action with the Phantom Blaster Dragon, a grade 3 triple rare for the clan, one of the most sought after cards of this set, and the grade 3 of the Blaster Type 2 Ride Chain. Just like all the previous Type 2 Ride Chains we've discussed so far, its skill cost Counterblast 2, but it also required you to retire 3 of your own rearguards. In exchange, Phantom Blaster Dragon, often abbreviated to PBD, gained 10k power and an additional critical until the end of the turn. We've discussed before with Soul Saver Dragon and Spectral Duke how strong an attack value like this is from a Vanguard, as it requires a lot of resources from your opponent to guard safely. Now, your opponent also had to deal with an additional critical, forcing them to possibly use a PG to just survive. This meant PBD could threaten to end the game even when your opponent is at 4 damage, or maybe even 3 damage if they feared you checking a crit on your drive check. Fortunately, this wasn't likely as Shadow Paladin only had one of each trigger type at this time. Here's what a list for PBD looked like. Most of the deck is devoted to gaining the necessary rearguards for PBD's effect, such as the triple rare Darkness Mating Matcha, who can call a unit out from your deck. The Dark Mage Bad to Hard card, who we discussed earlier, able to call the top card of your deck. And the triple rare Skull Witch Nemain, who allow you to draw 2 cards. In this list, we only see one copy of Blaster Dark, the dark counterpart of Blaster Blade. Here it's only run at 1 copy due to the Type 2 ride chain directly stretching out the card. However, many players played around with different ratios for this deck. Some even included the first ever Shadow Paladin card that the English format received, Origin Mage Illidanna. Illidanna was a limit break unit that asked you to counterblast 2 and retire 2 of your rearguards on attack in exchange for drawing 2 cards and gaining 3k power. This refunded the retired rearguards with some cards in hand to guard with, as well as being a 16k Vanguard swing with its other effect to gain 3k power on attack. Here's an Illidanna focus list. Illidanna was a good alternative to PBD as it played the same cards, but was a lot easier to obtain than PBD for some players. You could even play both in the same deck. Another card you could play in either build is the Dark Dictator promo we discussed earlier. While Dictator was a dark counterpart of Alfred, it actually worked more like a Shadow Paladin version of Soul Saver Dragon. Dictator could be ridden when you had no counterblast left, or you just needed to close out the game with big numbers. Because on ride, Dictator could give 2 front row Shadow Paladins 5k power for the cost of Soul Blast 3. It also had Alfred's effect to gain 2k power for each unit of its clan on board. Shadow Paladins had one of the greater debuts for a clan, if we excluded Illidanna and the Dordana from the extra booster as their first debut. We'll discuss Shadow Paladins a bit more in the next set when the deck gets an upgrade in the form of the Phantom Blaster Overlord. But before we move on from set 4, we have one last clan to talk about. Dimension Police received a great wave of support here, with some of its most iconic cards being printed in this set. We have the last of the triple rare grade 3s of a Type 2 ride chain here with Enigman Storm. Unlike the others, however, Enigman's effect did not require Counterblast 2. Instead, it had an effect basically identical to the Dayusha we discussed before. During the attack step, meaning the moment when you declare your attack with Enigman, but before you boost with a rearguard, if at that point in time Enigman's power was 15k or greater, this unit gained an additional critical. This was hard to achieve before with Dayusha, as you only really had access to the Mass Police Grandier, but the clan finally has more ways to make this possible thanks to this set. There was the double rare grade 2 Cosmo Beak that could counterblast 2 to give another unit 4k power. The grade 1 Cosmo Roar could rest itself to give a unit 2k power. With these cards, the effect of Enigman Storm and Dayusha were actually really easy to achieve now. You could combo this with the double rare Commander Laurel, a card that, as I mentioned earlier, still sees play to this day and is actually limited to 1 copy in the premium format currently. That's because Laurel could restand your Vanguard if its attack hit and you rested 4 of your rearguards. Your Vanguard would keep all its drives when it restood this way, however. With this set and other cards I mentioned, you can finally get a sense of what Dimension Police was all about. Giant robots and aliens that powered up and combined with the Vanguard for big attacks. Here's a Dimension Police list. I say specifically Dimension Police, as the list I'm sharing is also using 4 copies of Dayusha, meaning you can ride either Dayusha or Enigman Storm as your Vanguard. Instead of Dayusha, however, some players played the other grade 3 Enigman card of the set, Enigman Rain. Some even made use of the Glory Maker, a grade 1 that was recently released in Modern Vanguard. This deck played very Vanguard-centric, if it wasn't obvious, focusing on powering up the Vanguard for a big swing. You'd often set up a full board, Boost up Enigman or Dayusha, then swing into one of your opponent's rear guards first. This was so the attack was more guaranteed to hit, and you could then restand the Vanguard with Laurel's effect. After that, you would swing into the opponent's Vanguard with any critical or power you accumulated from your first attack's drive checks. We'll see this deck and clan evolve a bit more with the next set, Awakening of Twin Blades, but for now, we've covered all the clans supported in Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows and can finally continue our coverage of the 2012 World Championship Series. Before we can cover the World Championship Finals, we need to quickly discuss the 3 regional qualifiers held to find the 8 players that will compete in the finals. With set 7 being the last main booster set released during this time period, we may start to see those cards come into play. Perhaps Gold Paladins will finally be dethroned? No, who are we kidding? The first qualifier was the European qualifier and took place on October 21st, 2012. Europe was only allowed 1 representative for their region, so the winner of this event, Christopher Furnau from Germany, would go on to represent the European region in the World Finals. Christopher used the same exact list here as he did to win in Germany, an Ezo Garmor list. After Europe, we go to North America, where the qualifier took place on November 4th, 2012. Here, the top 4 from this event would go on to represent North America. The winner of the event was Brandon Smith, with the same exact Spectral Duke list he used to win the Canadian qualifier. In third was Gabriel Espinosa of Mexico, bringing Narukami, and the only person of the top 4 who didn't play Gold Paladin. Second and fourth went to Christopher Sock and Raymond Wong from the New York/New Jersey qualifier, who both played the same exact Spectral Duke list when they won that event. Here, they continued that same plan as they both played the same exact Gold Paladin list. But this time, they both played Garmor Pelennor decks with cards from set 7. Finally, the last regional qualifier was for the Asia-Oceania region, which was granted 3 spots in the World Finals. We had 2 Gold Paladins in first and second here, with Erwin Jansen Argo of the Philippines winning the event with an updated version of their Spectral Duke list to include set 7 cards. The second place winner was Henry from Indonesia, who also won second place in the Indonesian qualifier. Their list remained very similar to their win in the Indonesian qualifier. The final representative for the Asia-Oceanica region was Cham Chun Lok of Hong Kong with Tsukiyumi, completely pivoting from the luckier list they used to get second place in Hong Kong to qualify for this event. With these regionals done, we finally have here the 8 finalists from the first ever 2012 World Championship Finals. However, we have to take a minor detour before we get there. While it did not end up impacting any of the upcoming results, we did have an additional product that was available for the World Championship. The 4th main booster set, Eclipse of Illusionary Shadows, released on December 14th, 2012, 4 days after the World Championship Finals, but there was an extra booster released before then. Banquet of Divas released in the English format on November 9th, 2012. This was the second extra booster Japan received, but was also the second extra booster the English format received, with our first being Cavalry of Black Steel. While Cavalry of Black Steel gave us the powerful Spectral Duke Dragon, Banquet of Divas was unfortunately nowhere near as impactful. Banquet of Divas only had 35 unique cards, all of which were from the clan of Bermuda Triangle. This is a pattern that we'll start seeing in the future, where extra boosters only support 1 or 2 to 3 clans. This set served as a way to flesh out Bermuda Triangle, giving them their own set of triggers, including 2 of each trigger type except for heals, a perfect guard, and reprints of the 4 original Bermuda Triangle cards we received in set 2, Onslaught of Dragon Souls. These were among the first cards ever reprinted from a main booster set for the English format. Onslaught of Dragon Souls is also the last main booster set that would include Bermuda Triangle cards for basically the rest of the clan's existence. Similar to this release, Bermuda Triangle will only be supported through extra boosters and adjacent products going further. In the month of December, you were actually able to get deck dividers with the artwork of Bermuda Triangle triggers if you participated in shop tournaments at select stores. Banquet of Divas also came with box topper promos with non-Bermuda Triangle cards, surprisingly. This was only in the English version, as these cards were originally released as magazine promos in Japan. You actually got all 3 of these cards in one box. First was Lion Mane Stallion for Royal Paladin. This was Alfred's loyal steed, that ironically could not be used with the King of Knights Alfred, since he couldn't be boosted. Lion Mane Stallion needed to boost an Alfred to give a boosted Alfred 6k power, which meant you could only use this card with the previous box topper promo, Alfred Early. This makes sense, as Alfred Early is not riding a horse in its art. Gigantic Waterfall from Kagura was the second promo, and was a grade 3 with an interesting effect. This card could gain 3k power when it attacked the Vanguard, but then you could also discard one grade 3 Kagura card from your hand to have Waterfall gain 10k power. This allowed Waterfall to swing in for 23k before trigger checks or boosters are applied. The final promo was Stomp Sea Otter, which was actually not a magazine promo like the previous 2, but was released with the upcoming Trial Deck 7, like the Silver Rest we discussed earlier in the video. Stomp Sea Otter was an amazing card for Great Nature, as it was a grade 1 that could not be retired by card effects. This meant that you can stack your Great Nature effects on this card, and when it came time in the end phase to pay the cost to retire it, the Otter would remain. We may see this little fella in a future video when we go over Great Nature and its support. We also had an errata or a card in this set. Mermaid Idol Sedena, the grade 1 vanilla that was reprinted in this set, was erroneously misprinted with no critical. The errata just cleared up that this card did indeed have one base critical, like the majority of units in the game. Thanks to Banquet of Divas, we can finally see the themes explored for this clan with this expansion, as Bermuda Triangle is a clan of all female units who are mermaids, revolving around singing and performing. The main mechanic the clan generally focuses on is returning rearguards to the hand, referred to as bouncing a unit. We can see an example of this with the starter Bermuda Triangle Cadet Weldell, who I believe still sees play to this very day, or the double rare Girls Rock Rio, who gave you advantage when she was actually returned to hand by an effect. This card interestingly had an SP in the set, and the SP is actually just the same card, but without leggings and presumably human legs? The community tends to call these leg SPs. We also had a slightly different art for the reprint of Blazer Idols in this set. This set also gave the clan many of its most iconic units, such as the Mega Blast unit for the clan, the triple rare grade 3 top idol Pacifica, also the type 3 ride chain of Riviere, and the grade 3 Velvet Voice Reindeer. We'll see these cards more in the future Vanguard, but more so in their upgraded forms, as their initial release forms were not very powerful. While this was not an impactful set for the Worlds format, it was a set players had a lot of fun with, as there were as many different ways to build Bermuda Triangle, and cheaply, with this set alone. Here are a few examples. The Type 3 Ride Chain Riviere was able to get advantage early, as each card in the chain allowed you to add a card to hand. The payoff of this was Riviere's skill, which had a cost of Counterblast 2 and Persona Blast, but allowed you to give 3 rearguards 5k power, except this was only after her attack hit a Vanguard, making her a much weaker Soul Saver Dragon. The Pacifica build was a bit more true to the nature of Bermuda Triangle, as you were trying to bounce your own units in order to gain advantage and reuse effects. Pacifica was a Mega Blast unit, meaning she had a Soul Blast 8, Counter Blast 5 effect that would let you call out 3 cards from your deck if its attack hit a Vanguard, and of course if you paid its cost. However, she also had an effect at the start of every turn to Soul Charge 1, draw 1 card, and put 1 card from your hand on the bottom of your deck, allowing you to tutor a card every single turn. The final deck we'll be going over here is Reindeer. Velvet's Voice Reindeer had an effect we've seen in other clans, allowing you to call out a card from your hand when your drive check revealed a grade 3. This allowed you to get 4 to 5 attacks in a turn, and Reindeer also bounced a rearguard from your field to your hand for its cost. This allowed you to activate effects like the Girls Rock Reel or Rainbow Light Carnine to gain card advantage. Reindeer was actually a common in this set, which made it really easy to build. Bermuda Triangle will receive a lot more cards in the future, so we'll revisit them soon. But for now, let's finish the first ever Cardfight Vanguard 2012 World Championships. The World Championship Finals took place on December 9th, 2012 in Japan at the Tokyo Dome. This is quite amazing, as the Tokyo Dome is regarded as the Madison Square Garden of Asia and has been home to many prestigious events. This includes the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tokyo Dome Riot in 1999 and even the most recent World Finals for Yu-Gi-Oh! As a reminder, here are the 8 finalists that would compete in the World Finals. From my understanding, this top 8 was 2 rounds of Swiss, with each game being best of 3. This means you had to win a total of 2 games versus your opponent, with a maximum of 3 games being played. The top 4 players after those Swiss rounds would advance to the semi-final round. I wasn't able to find the exact pairings of this quarter-final round, but we do know that the top 4 that advanced to the semifinal were as follows: Brandon Smith with Spectral Duke Dragon, Christopher Fernau of Germany with Ezel Garmor, Henry of Indonesia with Pelennor Garmor, and finally Christopher Sock of the USA, now piloting Narukami. Christopher Sock seems to have switched to Narukami after passing the previous qualifying rounds with Gold Paladin. Perhaps Narukami was the best way to counter Gold Paladin. Unfortunately, it did not seem to work this way in the semi-final round, as we had Brandon with Spectral Duke Dragon make it to the finals, and Henry with Pelennor Garmor advancing to the finals as well. Christopher Sock would end up losing the 3rd place match to the other Christopher for now, who secured the 3rd place spot. To the surprise of none of you watching this or those at the time, the finals of the 2012 championships were Gold Paladin versus Gold Paladin. Apparently Henry was able to beat Brandon in the Swiss rounds, so this serves as a rematch. You can actually watch this entire finale on YouTube right now, as it was originally streamed on Nico Nico, the Japanese YouTube equivalent, and then uploaded to Cardfight Vanguard's YouTube channel. The entire match was rather close, with Henry able to perform an impressive turn 2 rush in the first game, and Brandon whiffing the Spectral Duke ride chain, riding the Garrett and the Balewains instead. That said, Brandon pushed Harry to 4 damage before you can ride his grade 3. This was extra painful as Henry missed his grade 3 ride, but was then able to superior ride into Pelennor mid-battle after an attack with his Nimue landed. This allowed him to check a crit on his new Vanguard swing, pushing Brandon to 4 damage as well. Missing the advantage of the Spectral Dude line put Brandon on the back foot, as while he was able to have a decent 2 Spectral Duke Dragon turns, Henry was able to guard his attacks and win Game 1. Game 2 was a very different affair for Brandon, as he was able to get all his Spectral Duke ride targets within his very first turn. This would eventually snowball as Henry missed his grade 1 ride in his very first turn and was actually forced to ride a PG on his second turn. Henry was just not able to catch up after this, even after managing to successfully ride a grade 2 and a grade 3. In these early stages of the game and in high level play, players would often attack into an opponent's front row rear guard. This is something that seems kind of foreign or pointless in modern Vanguard sometimes. However, with triggers only being 5k at this time and most decks not being able to easily amass card advantage, every single card counts. Henry was able to use this tactic to weaken some of Brandon's offense in this game, but ultimately fell to the Spectral Duke Dragon in Game 2 after a powerful double trigger turn. With that, we move to the final game of the first ever Cardfight Vanguard World Championships. This was a much closer game, with Brandon again unable to benefit from the Spectral Duke Dragon ride train, but with Henry not getting grade stuck this time. Henry was pushed to 4 by his first grade 3 turn, but was able to ride into Garmor and use a counter blast to call out the Nemain Lion, the Gold Paladin special intercept. Henry was then able to heal down to 3 during the Vanguard swing, which did turn off his limit break for now, but it did allow him to connect with an attack on Brandon's Vanguard to activate the effect of the booster Spring Breeze Messenger. This extended into a lop-eared shooter, who then extended into a Pelennor. Pelennor was able to give Henry yet another Vanguard swing, turning the game in his favor. This turn did push Brandon to 4 damage, allowing his limit break to be active. Brandon made the questionable play of calling his heal trigger to the front row to attack, but it allowed him to remove the main line from the board, which could then become retire fodder for Spectral Duke Dragon's limit break. Except Brandon also healed out of Limit Break on his first Vanguard swing. This would happen again on Henry's following turn, as he would heal down to 3 and then 2 damage after a double heal. Brandon would pay this back with his own double trigger turn, checking a draw and a crit to break through Henry's guard and pushing him to 4 on the following turn. Brandon would go to restand and check another crit, but Henry was just barely able to guard and survive. Unfortunately, all of these triggers allowed Brandon to easily guard Henry's final turn, and Brandon defeated Henry with a crit into his no guard with the Spectral Duke Dragon Restand. Brandon Smith is declared the winner of the 2012 Cardfight Vanguard World Championships. The Cardfight Vanguard 2012 World Championships finally comes to a close. I hope you all enjoyed my retelling of this event as much as I did trying to research it. There wasn't as much information available as there is for the championships today, sadly. But what I did find gave great insight into the creation of a tournament series that occurs to this day and that I've participated in so many years later. In the end, it was absolutely dominated by Gold Paladin. This is partly due to the lack of specific decks in the English format, but also due to the altered release schedule that the English format had that facilitated this. In the next video, we'll finally learn about the set that caused all these changes when we go over Booster Set 5, Awakening of Twin Blades, and finally learn about Majesty Lord Blaster and Dragonic Overlord The End, the other members of the Big Three.